Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to another Jessica Catto Speaker Dialogue. Thank you for braving the, is it raining yet? The wind? It was a tornado or a hurricane, I think, coming through as we came in here. Thank you. Come on down if you guys are coming down a little lower. I'm Chris Lane. I'm with Aspen Center for Environmental Studies. And welcome to the Jessica Catto Dialogue, where ACES features environmental doers, thinkers, people who are changing the world. And I want to thank this lecture series in honor of Jessica Catto. And I want to thank Mr. Henry Catto, and he started this lecture series in her memory. I want to thank the Catto Foundation as well, charitable foundation. I also want to give special thanks to Daniel Shaw and Isa Catto, who are with us here tonight, for their support and their leadership in this lecture series. Yes, thank you. This summer is ACE's 50th anniversary. Woo, 50 years of environmental science education, of sustainable agriculture, of convening great eco-luminaries, and of civic leadership, and most importantly, environmental ecological literacy. So thank you for your support of the last 50 years. And the next 50 years, we're going to continue to do our work, but we're going to do even some new, different things. We're going to connect influencers with nature. We're going to transform the way the world thinks about food. And we're going to give people the ecological literacy they know to make informed decisions in this world that's gotten more and more complex. Did everybody see the New York Times this morning? The headline before they put up the Iranian drone getting shot, or the drone getting shot down by Iran? If you got up early like I did, you saw that the headline today in the New York Times was EPA finalizes its plan to replace the Obama-era climate rules. And that was right to the side of, with surging storms and rising seas, which U.S. cities should be saved. Can you believe that's a headline on this earth? We're deciding which U.S. cities we're going to save from flooding. Anyway, the EPA finalizing that is a big deal because that's reversing essentially what one administration did to protect climate change in the name of protecting the coal industry. And that happened yesterday. And this is the world we live in today. So I thank you guys for all showing up tonight to hear what someone very unique is doing about this. But before, I'm not introducing the speaker. I'm going to introduce someone very special to us tonight, and that's a man who's a ACES board member. He's a journalist. He's a musician. He's a father and an all-around great guy, Mr. Daniel Shaw, who's going to introduce our speaker. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you all for being here. I think some people got deterred by the weather for sure. It's weird out there, especially for this time of year. And I just want to thank everyone for coming, especially the Reverend Yearwood from DC. And although I'm pretty sure he's not too unhappy to get out of the swamp and help drain the swamp for a couple of days. And I also want to recognize, speaking of DC, our friend Mike Curtin, who's here tonight. Mike runs an incredible organization called DC Central Kitchen in DC, which feeds people. I won't even get into it. Just look it up or come talk to Mike afterwards if you so desire. So welcome, Mike. It's great to have you here. And we all know that climate change and environmental disasters disproportionately affect people of color and poor and disenfranchised people of all kinds. And yet their voices are, for the most part, glaringly absent from the environmental movement. And through the Hip Hop Caucus, Reverend Yearwood has made it his mission to remedy that, to literally change the face of the environmental movement, to change the narrative. He grew up in Louisiana, went to the University of District of Columbia, then earned his Master's of Divinity from Howard University, and somehow was student body president at both UDC and Howard in his time at both schools, which I've never heard of anyone doing before. And then he went on to serve in the Air Force Reserves. And he entered the world of hip-hop politics while serving as the political and grassroots director of Russell Simmons' Hip Hop Summit Action Network in 2003 and 2004, which had a huge impact on the elections of that year. And in 2004, he also was a key architect of 3 other voter turnout operations. P. Diddy's Citizen Change organization, which created the Vote or Die campaign, Jay-Z's Voice Your Choice campaign, and Hip Hop Voices, which was a project of the AFL-CIO. And after doing all this, he decided in that year, 2004, that he needed to do something bigger and founded the Hip Hop Caucus to bring all of this together and bring the power of the hip hop community and generation to Washington, D.C. And as part of the caucus, he still leads the Respect My Vote campaign and coalition. And through that, they've registered and mobilized tens of thousands of young voters who otherwise likely would never have registered to vote over the years. And in 2008, they set a world record of registering the most voters in one day in our elections, 32,000 people across the US in 16 cities. And all I can say is, all I'm saying is, Reverend, please do it again this year. And quadruple, quintuple, multiply that by 100 times. But it was really his Reverend Yearwood's environmental focus really began in the wake of Hurricane Katrina in 2005 when he established the Gulf Coast Renewal Campaign, where he led a coalition of national and grassroots organizations to advocate for the rights of Katrina survivors. And ever since, he's been successfully bridging the gap between communities of color and environmental advocacy. And it's a big gap. He's got a really diverse set of creative allies to raise awareness and action in communities that are often overlooked by traditional environmental campaigns, and we're all guilty of that, a lot of us in this room. He does this through incredible innovative creations such as Think 100%, which is mentioned up here, which is a media platform and podcast that inspires climate action and drives solutions that work for everyone. And also a program called People's Climate Music, which is a project that creates and curates music, art, and other creative content that sparks action. And through all of this, he's garnered quite a bit of support for the caucus from environmental leaders, from more traditional environmental organizations, including National Wildlife Federation, Earth Justice, and Al Gore's Alliance for Climate Protection. And we need everyone on this planet to fight for its survival. And as a minister, a community activist, and an advocate, Reverend Yearwood is working tirelessly to encourage the hip-hop generation to utilize its really potent political and social voice and its growing political and social voice to do its part. So please welcome the Reverend Lennox Yearwood Jr. to Aspen.
Man, thank you so much. I actually appreciate the playing of Nipsey Hussle here in Aspen. I don't know how much y'all get Nipsey Hussle here in Aspen, but I certainly appreciate that. And so for me to say but first that rest in power, Nipsey Hussle. He was an amazing artist in Los Angeles who lost his life this year, unfortunately, to gun violence. So how are y'all doing tonight? Are y'all ready to have a real conversation? Didn't sound like it too much. Are y'all ready to have a real conversation about what we need to do to win on climate? Okay, that sounded more like it. So the last time I was here in Colorado, I received an award. That was amazing. By Conservation Colorado. I received the Rebel with a Cause Award, and that award meant a lot to me for a lot of reasons. One of the main reasons it meant a lot to me was because that same year, climate activist Berta Cáceres in Honduras was assassinated. And so for me, I almost felt a little guilty. I almost felt like, wow, I mean, man, I'm getting this award, I'm going to Colorado, to Denver, and there are other activists who are literally dying and being killed by the fossil fuel industry. And so that day when I came here, I went, and as you will notice, I wear a lot of hats. I mean, a lot of hats. And so that's actually in my office in DC, and literally I have hundreds of hats. But for the one here that I came I had Berta Cáceres on that hat, and it meant so much to me. But I wear many hats, and there's some hats that are actually inspiring, and there's some hats that are very, very sad. Some of my sad hats are like my hat says Eric Garner. Eric Garner, who was choked out in New York, and he says, "I can't breathe." But many of us saw where Eric Garner said, "I can't breathe," but in that aspect, it wasn't so much he was just a legal chokehold, but it was that Eric Garner was also choking because in Staten Island, it received an F for air quality. And 68% of African Americans live within 30 miles of coal-fired power plants. And so many of them are choking. So even like that physically being choked, Eric Garner was still choking. I can't breathe. And what was even sadder is that Eric had a number of children. And almost all of Eric Garner's children also have asthma. So my second saddest hat was then when Erica Garner, his daughter, died because of an asthma attack that caused a heart attack. So you're seeing this kind of genocide that's going on within African American communities. So in the photo next to that one, you see me wearing the hat I'm wearing tonight, because I thought this was a very special night. Thank you to ACES for having me. Definitely. So I wanted to wear a hat for the occasion. So hat's kind of depressing, actually, but I still wanted to wear it. You didn't laugh on that at all. That's okay. But it's a 12-year hat. I actually wore it the first hearing in Congress on climate change. I was blessed by Representative Grijalva to be asked to speak. And so I wore this hat 12 years. The hat represents the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change by the UN. The report that came out last year that stated that we literally have 12 years to act before we can't do anything else. So we're just moving then to climate adaptation. And then the next generation behind us, which literally is living in a horrible state. And so that leads to the next part, because with that sense of urgency, that means that we need to have members and politicians who would be eager to act, which is kind of part of this spiel tonight, because it's kind of a conversation that climate change is a civil rights issue. And so just for the record off the top, let me be very clear. Climate change is a civil rights issue. We have a right to clean air, and we have a right to clean water. That's something that we should not be debating. Neither should we be debating the issue of climate change. But unfortunately, we need to have politicians who are in office. So we had this amazing sweeping that came in with this new Congress of climate change activists. One of them was AOC. And when AOC came into office, he came into office talking about a Green New Deal. What she was talking about was that, man, the urgency of the moment. As a matter of fact, this headline just came out last week saying that the permafrost in the Canadian Arctic is thawing 70 years, not 70 months, not 700 years, not 70 years faster. That is causing a climate crisis that we could not even imagine. And so that means that we can't play with this. So when you have the IPCC report saying you have 12 years, and then you have reports that in the Arctic, they're saying that literally the permafrost, the last tipping point before a climate crisis, is thawing rapidly, faster, 70 years faster than we could have imagined. So that led to AOC, Representative Alexander Ocasio-Cortez, when she came into office, to be at this discussion. And in that discussion, she said this. She mentioned about the Green New Deal. But she went further in this discussion, and this is what she said.
And that is what this moment demands of us right now. That's what we have to do. This is going to be the great society, the moonshot, the civil rights movement of our generation. That is the scale. That is the scale of the ambition that this movement is going to require.
You can clap to that also. You can clap. That's very important. That's a good thing. That's what we do need. And that's the kind of scale that we need in this movement. But this is where we have a little bit of a problem that we need to discuss. After AOC made that comment, there are many who were in the civil rights community who weren't happy. And they begin to tweet out. Some of those, Shirley Eiffel, who was the head of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, one of amazing activists, begin to tweet out things like, we still have, in essence, a civil rights movement. And many people were tweeting that out. Many of those were upset because of the language that was being put forth. Now, this is kind of why I wanted to come here today, because yes, climate change is a civil rights issue. But why would there be anger? Why would particularly people of color be upset at the climate change movement for talking about it as a civil rights movement? So we should dig into that a little. And so into that, let's go back a little bit. In 2009, the climate movement put a lot of money into pushing forth a cap and trade bill, which was kind of known as the Markey-Waxman bill. And many folks today still talk about cap and trade, and we should have that conversation about what cap and trade is. And now what we see in California, and now what Oregon is now proposing, there are some possibilities, but the main thing about that the movement, the predominantly white climate movement, begin to move forward with legislation, not looking for those who the cap and trade process would hurt. In essence, the pollution component of that bill would go back to polluting those like the Eric Garners and the Erica Garners. And so those in the environmental justice community said, no, we can't have that. We're not going to be with you. You can't use that moment to do that. And the climate movement, as it does sometimes, said, well, we don't need you then. We're just going to go forth and do what we're going to do. We don't need you. We have, President Obama is now in office, and we're going to put forth legislation, and we're going to make it happen. And it failed miserably. Now, it's important, Hip Hop Caucus, we were also beginning to organize at this time as well. As a matter of fact, there I am. We gathered. Former EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson is there, and I'm on August 4th of 2009 outside the White House, and we're launching this Green the Block. We're super excited about what can happen. Now we're hearing with the cap and trade, and we're going through all these things with the Markey-Waxman bill, but we're hearing people of color are upset because they're not included in the process. And even though we would be doing our job, Hip Hop Caucus, and I'll get my friend, matter of fact, this is actually Drake. I wanted to put Drake on here because they just won a trophy, so I figured why not? Actually, when Drake is clean shaven back then, I worked with Drake as he was greening his tour, which was exciting as well. I had my friends like Drake and Wyclef Jean out there greening their tours. We're doing this thing with a green the block. And this Markey Waxman bill, because the climate movement doesn't understand some aspects, begins to go left and fail. This is key though, because in 2010, 10 years ago, we could have that kind of failure. But now, with the Green New Deal and other legislation, we can't afford that kind of failure. To kind of give you the idea I'm talking about, young people particularly, they don't enjoy this in this aspect. AOC was 19 when the climate bill was being put forth by Markey Waxman, enjoying Boston University before she would go to Congress in that aspect. But we don't have 10 years to act. And that's the crux of this conversation. So what happened? Why was the civil rights movement, why were the indigenous people, why were they not willing to trust the climate change or the environmental movement? What happened in that process? And so I kind of want to take you back 50 years in that. And so this is one thing that's very, very important. So 50 years ago, 1968 to 1972 was an amazing time for activism in our country. We had the marches going on, the civil rights marches, fighting for voting rights, fighting for education, fighting for housing. We had an amazing movement that was taken into the streets. At that time as well, we had those who were proud and working, and they had an inside-outside strategy. Dr. King understood that either you shape policy or policy will shape you. And so they were actually working it. And I'm from Louisiana, so they also understood that either you're at the table or you're on the menu. There's no in between. So they're working it at the time. It's an exciting time for the movement. As a matter of fact, not only were black folks organizing, white folks were organizing too. They were burning draft cards, taking on Vietnam. It was a powerful time. Young folks were excited about challenging an unjust system, moving forward. So all this has happened between 68 and 72. And if you go forward, we see the Stonewall riots. Our gay brothers and sisters would rise up and say, enough is enough. And they would rise up in 69 and demand that we can love who we want to love. And so you have these movements, civil rights, Vietnam, Stonewall, women's rights, all going on in this time frame. And you can see here, it's actually very important. I want you to look, during that time frame, so many things are created because while you have this conservation movement that is actually very old in some cases, 100 years, 125, the modern day environmental movement is coming alive in 68 and 69 and 70 and 71 and 72. As a matter of fact, during that time frame, this little group out in Aspen named ACES is created during that time frame for a lot of different reasons. You have many groups, Union of Concerned Scientists, NRDC, LCV. We would have Earth Day. We would create the EPA. It was a renaissance time for the environmental movement. Young people were beginning to organize and take the streets, and we would see action. So even though we had smog in Los Angeles and the Cuyahoga River was on fire in Cleveland, the environmental movement was on fire, and we even had a Republican president sign legislation. Just think about that. That really was 50 years ago. So long ago. We had Richard Nixon. Now, he wasn't no green fly now, but he was still wise enough to create things for the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency. Climate change wasn't a partisan issue. That's how radical this time was. And so you had literally the first Earth Day. We even approached that next year in 2020, 50 years for the first Earth Day. We literally had millions, and I do mean millions, in the streets fighting. This was an amazing time. You're created. Other groups are created. We're creating legislation. We're creating policy. We're moving things forward. We have millions of people in the streets. So then you're thinking, how did we get to the point where 50 years later, we're not all on the same page? And our movement isn't really strong enough to take on the greatest foe in the fossil fuel industry. Dennis Hayes said this. He said, the goal is not to clean the air while leaving slums and ghettos, nor is it to provide a healthy world for racial oppression and war. He was the co-founder of Earth Day. And so you're thinking that, well, then, Rev, with all of this solidarity, how could we become such a siloed, even segregated, progressive movement? How did we get to the point where, yes, climate change is a separate issue, but you're not adding about, but how do we mend this process? And so what happened? A lot of things happened. And so one of the key things there that begins to happen is that this core issue of fighting both poverty and pollution and fighting for our planet, somewhere down the line, we begin to decide that it's better to fight these issues in silos. So you over there in fighting poverty, you deal with that and you fight that over here. And you over here dealing with pollution. Even though you're connected to climate, you fight that. And those of us over here in the climate movement will stay over here. And even though it's going to make us pretty much a very Birkenstock movement that's on the East Coast, on the West Coast, we're going to do that. And we begin to become siloed. So and even though the climate movement would see the injustice begin to happen in the 70s, they would begin to turn their backs away from the cries. And people would yell, listen, we're in the streets. Help us out here, my brother, my sister in the environmental movement, help us. They would turn their backs as their brown brothers and black brothers and red brothers and discuss the animals. Yes, in nature. We need to fix nature. And they would discuss, yes, we need to have more nature over here and discuss more with the polar bears and look at the wolves. And these are very important. We must deal with that. And while people are screaming and dying in the streets and they're protesting and they're marching and they're going forth, then we would begin to turn their back. On what was happening. Even here in Warren County, North Carolina, when black folks begin to take on pollution firsthand, the core piece of what is destroying us in the climate movement, the beginnings of the environmental justice movement in 1980, you would be wondering, like, my God, even now they must see this. There are black folks who are going to the streets, who are fighting in Warren County, North Carolina. They are rising with a new environmental justice movement. That's a new term that they've been talking about. Justice movement. Environmental justice, and still the larger country movement, but still they would deal with that and sometimes use that and sometimes tokenize that, but turn their back to that. And it would even continue today. And many of you, thank God for you, who would join us in Standing Rock or against Keystone in an aspect. We're still the larger movement. wasn't putting their forces behind Standing Rock or behind Keystone or behind divestment. It wasn't doing that. It was still in its safe place, leading them to the Markey-Waxman bill, but in their safe place, while their black and red and yellow brothers fought by themselves. So when Alexander Ocasio-Cortez makes that mention, it's the reason why then this rights movement and the indigenous movement would turn their back on the climate movement. Because you weren't here for us, so why now should we be here for you? And so this problem goes on. Because there are folks of color who actually work for large climate organizations. There's a group called Green 2.0. If you don't know, please make sure and look that up. Green 2.0 does a survey that examines how many people of color are in management positions in large green organizations. They did a survey about 3 years ago, and they show almost about 90%. A lot of the big green organizations wouldn't even give their results because they were predominantly all white. Now, I actually work in Washington, D.C. I'm actually amazed because I'm trying to think sometimes, how can you be so white in a black city? God, you can't. You got to just bump into somebody black or brown or red. My goodness. And they would have the entire boards that are white or entire organizations that are white. Like, you're not even trying to find folks of color. And so they did a study on this. And in their study, Green 2.0, their study showed that it was almost 90% on the first go-round. And many of the big green organizations were shocked. My goodness. 90% of our staff is white? That can't be the case. No. They said, yes. No. Yes. So then Griffith did another study. A year later. And guess what happened? It got worse. It got more white. It went from 90% to 95%. It's like, my goodness, how are we going to win this battle with only one side, like having a football team with only quarterbacks? You want quarterbacks, but a team full of quarterbacks can't win the game. You need every position. You need guards and tackles and wide receivers and running backs. You need coaches. You need all these people in position. But this movement still just feels that all they need is quarterbacks to win the game. And they're losing on every side. Got worse. So then they came up with a new report. This June, we're in June now, 2019, that said that this is the thing. Not only are people not hiring people of color, but the diversity is so bad in the environmental movement that it's worse than the tech industry in Silicon Valley. And if that wasn't bad enough, the environment is so toxic for people of color that they put out something called leaking talent. It's so bad to work for black, red, brown, red, yellow people. I say this, I want to save the planet too, but it's so bad. I would rather just quit this position because it's such a toxic, patronizing world to work in. At this, one of the people who stood up, who worked for a Big Green, a Latino brother, who's a VP. I'm going to make sure I said the setting. He's a VP for a Big Green. He came to tell his story of what it's like to be a person of color working for an environmental organization.
very little English. So I have a master's degree, and I have a strong command of the English language. But I have to tell you, there are many days that I have no idea what our environmental movement is talking about. And it's not like I don't understand the words. I mean, I get that. It's just that these words really don't mean anything to me. There are some folks who are gonna get jacked talking about Reggie and cap and trade, talking about RPS and cafe standards. And, when I hear this, all I hear is wah, 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 wah. I don't hear words like freedom. I don't hear words like justice. I don't hear words like family, which, like my mother, is the reason that I came here to this movement. Sometimes I feel like this movement doesn't care if I get it or not. And sometimes I don't think this movement even sees me. And I wonder, as Beatrice said,
that's horrible. This beautiful Latino brother who's working in the movement doesn't feel, even working for the movement, that this movement even sees him working for the movement. And he wants to leave, or doesn't want to be around, or doesn't get it. So this is where we are. So we have to be at a point where what are we willing to sacrifice? Like hats. And time is clicking. 12 years was last year. My hat now says 11 years. Because time is running out. And so while we begin to play these games with our own organizations, we have to be in a position that what are we willing to sacrifice? I am a preacher. I was an Air Force chaplain. And so one of the things there, one of the stories in that process that blesses me was when Jesus, this Palestinian Jew, tells the young rich ruler, he says, what can I do to get to heaven? And he tells this young rich person, he says, well, you got to sell everything and follow me. And it says the young rich person went away sad. It was too hard. So we got to decide. You got to decide right now. Okay, Rev is saying we got, the Arctic is thawing out. We got 12 years. We got destruction. Our children deserve that fight. Are we willing to change what we have to do to make our organizations and organizations where everybody is involved? So I'll say the bottom line to that is, how do we fight poverty and pollution at the same time? So there's some good parts to that. So the first thing is we actually can win on climate. We can. So what it didn't do 50 years ago, we could do now. The first thing is, like this thing shows, we have to break down the silos within our movement. We cannot win as a siloed, segregated climate movement or a segregated progressive movement. We cannot win. We must break down the silos and see how climate affects everything. So if it's Black Lives Matter, if it's women's rights, if it's immigration, whatever the issue must be, we must connect the dots. That's the first thing that we must do. We must break down the silos. And we must really try to figure that out. This is me. One of my greatest moments, I think. I had a lot of fun here. I was fighting with the Gwich'in people, and still fighting with the Gwich'in people in the Arctic at a BLM meeting. I like that because, I got to tell the folks who I don't think were listening to me at the BLM meeting that BLM also means Black Lives Matter. So that was just a little, and nothing else. I told the folks at the Bureau of Land Management that y'all could be like Black Lives Matter. I just said nothing else. That was just I could leave on that note. Give them high fives. All my brothers and sisters from the Arctic, we walking out of there. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, you know, y'all heard that. Yeah, right. Make this Black Lives Matter, y'all. But the seriousness there, though, is that we need to take away from looking at it from Bureau of Land Management and Black Lives Matter and seeing how those things actually go together. So we actually do a show. So one of the things we do, Hip Hop Caucus, is that we actually started a show called Think 100%, the coolest show on climate change. Please, you got to take up the pockets, the greatest thing. Not for me, but actually for Antonique Smith, who's actually a Grammy-nominated actress who's in like every single movie. And also for the young people like 0 Hour and Sunrise Movement who are coming on and using that platform to talk about these things. Looking forward to being with those who are part of the Juliana U.S. case next week. And then the week after that, being with the 0 Hour during their conference. Young people are rising up. That's actually part of the solution. I'll get to some of those solutions in a step-by-step. But it is young people, and I want to just reinforce that. They are the key to breaking down the silos. Way that we went on climate is that young people get it. They get it. They want to get to the root. They don't want to be comfortable because they also realize that if they don't make a change, those who are 20 and when they are 50, or those who are 30 when they're 60, so on and so forth, they realize that they will not be many of the things because this generation won't make the change they have to make. So they're the ones, and I believe we need to give them the resources and the infrastructure, not come into our organizations to get bad habits and have a place that's toxic. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying, but let them create new organizations and new opportunities. Let them be how we were in 68 and in 69 and in 70, and let them give a go at it. The same way we create these organizations now, let's finance them to the same level that needs to be financed in this process. Let them go from the suites to the streets. Let them be the ones who lead the group. They're the ones who will face the repercussions of this climate catastrophe and this climate crisis. So let them be the ones to at least fight it out to the end. Why one must be as old people get in the way while we won't even be here, while these children who will deal with this disaster, they let them get them a fighting chance, give them all the resources and all the mechanisms to make this change happen. If nothing else, they lose. And their thing is much different because while many of us fought for equality in the 20th century, they are now fighting for existence in the 21st century. So give them the chance to fight and that they can fight no other. I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic and act as if the house was on fire. These children are laying it out. This child, 16-year-old, is doing it. Greta's been amazing. And doing it with just such integrity. Actually goes along and fights the way. So you're asking, okay, Rev, we get it. We get it. So now what? You got us. You got us, Rev. My God, we came here. Man, ACES people got me in here. You got me. Oh, that you brought that old Rev here, and he tore me up. Okay, what do we got to do? What do we got to do here, Rev? Let's make it happen. Just give it all up in. We're all in. Okay. Step one. Let's go through it. We must have a multicultural, multi-issue, grassroots-based, people of color-led climate movement. I want to say that again because y'all didn't appreciate that, so I'm going to say it one more time. We must have a multicultural, multi-issue, grassroots-based, people of color-led climate movement. Step 2, we must have mass demonstrations like the global climate strike on September 20th, 2019 that make visual the determination and the breadth of our movement. We must get out from behind our desk and get into the streets. And we may have to get arrested. Let it be what it be. We must bring the gears of this machine to a halt. Step 3, we must have a massive turnout on Election Day, November 3rd, 2020, particularly by women, people of color, young people, progressives, and everyone else who understands now not voting and not making people respect our vote would be a catastrophe for the country and the world. Step 4, we must make sure we have a bold climate action plan for the progressive new Congress and new president to implement in their first 100 days in office, starting January 20, 2021. We must make this bold plan clear that we are serious about a government of the people, by the people, and for the people and the planet. And if we do, oh Lord, if we do, we have a fighting chance of preventing full-out climate meltdown and leaving future generations with a world grounded in justice and love, and a world worth living in and fighting for. Let me close with this. 3 things that are super important: young people, solidarity, and love. We do that, y'all, we can win. There's been nothing like this. I wouldn't be on this stage now if it wasn't for amazing Black people. This is actually the 400th year. 1619 is when slaves first arrived in Virginia. And those 400 years of hardship have also led to an amazing overcoming. But I wouldn't be on this stage if it wasn't for them, and also white folk who were abolitionists and said, this isn't right. And we're going to stand up. If it even means we got to lose our land and our property, or even go to war, we got to be willing to do that. Or for gay rights, or women's rights, on and on. We're at a moment. It's not no hype. I know this is, we're living in that moment that we either stand up or don't. So let me close with this. 100 years from now, June 20th, 2119. Nobody in here will be alive. None of you. Not one. 100 years from now, none of you will be here. I need that actually to sink in. I need you to feel with that temporary state of life that we have. Not your money, your cars, Aspen, Chicago, LA. You and me will not be here 100 years from now. But what will be here is what we do now. If we fight and lay it all on the line and face this moment and this climate crisis head on. If we deal with our mistakes and say, yes, we made mistakes. We siloed ourselves. We got too much into that nonprofit industrial complex. And so we got too much into relying on funders and relying on this one or that one. And that's important. We gotta have money. We gotta have resources. But we didn't connect the dots. We forgot. We turned our back. We made a mistake, but we're now willing to connect the dots. We're going to open our door. We're going to make sure that our organizations are more diverse. We're going to have young people not just coming for a kiddie table to be around, to be some cute aspect, but to be leading these organizations. We are going to change because we know what's on the line. Because 100 years from now, what is going on, you can just imagine what that next generation will be up against if we allow for climate change to run rampant and fossil fuel industries just to make money. We can imagine what's going to happen to Long Island and to Miami. We've seen it with Hurricane Katrina and Irma and Maria and Harvey. We've seen it already. We've seen those dying and floating down the street. We've seen wildfires take away towns. We've seen it right now. So can you imagine what it will be like 100 years from now, which is why we must do everything in our power, in our body, to stand up and fight for the next generation. You must do everything. We can do it. I believe in us. I believe that we can come together as black and white and brown and red and male and female and straight and gay and theist and atheist. I believe that we can come together as humans. And I know that if we come together as humans, then we can win. I believe that because I still believe that organized people beats organized money every single time. And so I know without a doubt that if we seize this moment, and we can seize this moment, then we can win. But we only will know that if we come together. And when those who are looking at this tape 100 years from now, you see those who are standing up. You see my fist raised. If you happen to find this little old raggedy tape somewhere and you have clean air and clean water, that means that we as humans were victorious. All power to the people. Thank you.
Have we? Thank you so much. Have we come a long way from Al Gore to this? We have a couple of questions, a couple of minutes for questions. Do we have a mic going around, or maybe we're intimate enough? Right here, Tilly.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Is this on? Okay. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you calling this out and bringing it to the forefront. And I'm curious, what can we as, white people in Aspen who have a lot of influence and know a lot of people, but what could you give us all to do as individuals as action to take that actually moves the line? Because when I'm in these climate things with all of these people, I look around and it's primarily mostly white male and older white males. So how can we be involved?
It's a great question. All the things that I listed in those steps, and hopefully this video will be shared by ACES and others so they can go through those 4 steps. Your point is, as an individual, I think that this one about building solidarity and holding accountable, I think is looking at the organizations now and looking at them and saying, hey, what are you doing? Have you read the Green 2.0 report, for example? What are you doing to transition? what can be what can happen there. And two, when you're in a community that maybe doesn't have many people of color, then also what are we doing to help other communities? What are we doing to help in Flint? What are we doing to help in other communities that are struggling? How are we using our resources and leverage in that aspect? How are we working with groups like Hip Hop Caucus, and that they're using their platform, or groups like 0 Hour or Sunrise and other groups like that? How are we using our resources to help those organizations? One of the things that I saw recently, Sunrise received an award, and they're very dear to me. So myself and Bill McKibben and Naomi Klein went on tour back during the Keystone, and we were talking about, regarding the divestment movement and the need for divestment. And so one of the things there was that we also did something called Forward on Climate. It was amazing because you don't know your impact. So Varshney, who is now the ED for Sunrise, was a student at UMass Amherst, and she came to me and said, Rev, you gave one of your speeches. It was freezing outside. It was very cold. It was very powerful because at that moment we also took on President Obama. That's one thing we must do too. We must take on our own establishment. I think that too many times we play this game. This is not about Republican or Democrat, it's about humanity. And so we have to get out of that paradigm of not holding people accountable and not holding folks because they're Democrat. No, this moment requires that we hold everyone accountable. You cannot discuss fracking on Monday and renewables on Wednesday and be a climate activist. And so we need politicians and all of us to be serious about what we're discussing. But as an individual, I would just say for you that definitely, for you, just doing all you can to put your dollars with organizations. Now, I'll say this, I am hopeful that because of this conversation, that many of those who are in organizations, they will change. But at the same time, it's like that young, rich ruler. I'm not hopeful because they may walk away. That's too hard for us to do. We have, we have these jobs now. We have this and I have that. And so I can't make a decision. And so we as a movement must be willing to hold them accountable. And we can't be afraid of the friction. We can't allow another 10 years or 50 years. We don't have it. We just don't simply have it. So for your job is to do just that. Begin to hold voices accountable and make sure your voice is heard and saying, listen, if we're coming to a place, if it's just all people who are white, how we're using our privilege, our resources to help other communities, how are we breaking down the walls around us so we can help those as well.
Another question? I'm going to go over here. Nope, that's you, Grayson.
I 100% agree that we need to. All of these organizations need to be mutually supporting. But from the organizational perspective, having graduated from 2 schools or gone to 2 schools over the last decade or so, and been in natural resources, there's not a big pool of candidates to hire. How do you recommend we fix that?
Yeah, there's a lot of those falsehoods, right? We just got to break those too. And I think that's one thing there. There's a lot of falsehoods that say, well, people of color, red, brown, and black, they have other problems they got to deal with. They're dealing with police brutality. They're dealing with, gentrification. And so that's actually an excuse. We sometimes use that as the way for us not to deal with it. That's not real, because we all need clean air, clean water. We're all dealing with we saw what happened with Katrina. We saw what happened with Sandy. We saw what happened with Harvey and Irma, Paradise, you name it. We saw what happened. Particularly poor people are the ones who are most impacted by climate change because they actually can't move, and actually they can't move quickly. A lot of us who are not middle class and upper middle class can actually leave and move locations. So that's the first. We got to break that. And then secondly, there's so many schools. Again, if we want to make the investment, there's my schools that produced me, which I think I did an okay job, historical black college universities, both UDC and Howard and St. Paul's and all the other schools I've been around in my life. They would love to get the dollars to create the curriculum and the programs that are needed. I think we have to really break out of what has been put into us and told to us and begin to really reach beyond that and be what I love for young people. Young people today are different. They are not so much as it was in 68 or to 72 revolutionary as they are solutionary, which means that young people today are different because they have a tendency to want to actually, that's why I have to give my bullet points. They want you to give them the solution. What are we doing here, Rev? Where are we going to? And then when they hear that, they are willing to go out there and do whatever it takes to make it happen. In the old days, it used to be like, we just go out there and just raise hell and Cain. I'm not even sure what the hell is going on here, but we raising hell and Cain. Burn draft card, hell yeah, burn draft card. So we going through whatever that may be. This generation is different, so sophisticated. They also are so much more loving. I think the one thing that they want to do, which we're not doing, is that our movement doesn't have love, which I put on the screen. We don't, when I say love, I mean love. I mean where we are concerned about one another, when we are friends, when we are partners, when we care about one another, when it's not superficial and plastic. I'm saying that's what we need to have to survive this climate catastrophe. But to your point about the schools, we have to make an investment. Again, this is about an investment in young people organizations, an investment in people of color-led organizations, an investment in curriculum at schools that can teach what people of color are going to school. We have to make the investment. Let me be very clear. Our movement has grown. We don't have one of the problems with our movement actually, that we don't have a poor movement. Our movement actually has a lot of money that comes through our hands. This is not like we're talking about just a few $1,000s. We have literally hundreds of millions of dollars that flows through our hands as a movement. And so we now as a movement need to be responsible and now share those blessings. But also as a movement, we got to be also the point where I think that has also caused us to not to need to work with people. The civil rights movement needed other entities to work with. And so even it was with Dr. King, working with his Jewish brothers and sisters, or working with, the SNCC, the students at that time, or whoever, there was a need to work together to succeed. Our movement sometimes doesn't feel we need that, and we have our own culture. And so because we feel we're so big and we don't need that, and we can go to our own funders. Now, funders are changing. Listen, I'm around a lot of funders, and they are requiring this. They are changing this. They are saying that they are concerned about where we are going, and they are saying enough is enough. Either you make these changes or we're not going to fund you anymore. And so I'm very happy about many funders who are stepping up and demanding that organizations make these kind of changes. So to your point, we need to fund those institutions where people of color are going to school and put those curriculums together. They will have a wealth of those candidates. But again, not creating that leaking pipeline, not putting people into positions where they feel so toxic and so ostracized they want to leave. But let's fix all of these things in a very quick time frame, mind you, and move forward.
Okay, we have time for one more question. I'm going to go over here. Yes.
You think we can succeed? Because if you think we can succeed, I believe we can have hope while being panicked and acting like the house is burning.
Well, first, thank you for that. I actually feel that question. I do feel if we do these things that I talked about, we can succeed. I want to be real, though, but we have to do that. It's like if the doctor tells you that, listen, you have to, cut back on the red meat or on the alcohol, and you keep drinking a 6-pack every single night, or you're not making the changes, then unfortunately there will be a demise at the end of that process because you did not listen to the prophetic or the instruction. I believe we can win, but I believe we have to have courage. And I want to say this to you and to all young people. I understand, I understand that this right here is hard. I understand that even the changing of my hat from 12 years to 11 years can cause a kind of depression. I've seen so many young climate activists and other activists who have been committing suicide, who don't feel they can make it. And I get so many calls of people who have told me that this amazing 18-year-old or 19-year-old or 20-year-old took their life because, one, we didn't support them, two, we left them out to hang, and three, we just didn't give them the love and support and create mechanisms at a time with the, just think about it, we keep telling them that this is what this is. But I do believe we can make it. I believe that. I believe that, man, I've seen it through history. I've seen what we did with gay rights, women's rights, civil rights. I've seen it. This is the biggest challenge humanity has faced. And you're facing with the time clock. It seems completely unfair. But I believe that we can win. I do. I believe that if we come together and if these organizations really decide that, listen, 50 years is enough, we've been around for a long time, let's begin to make sure we transition or give resources or make sure we do things differently. I think that if that happens, and I hope it does, and I'm going to be on my side, hope you be on your side, I'm going to just keep putting the heat, you keep putting the heat, I think we can win. And if not, we fought like hell. We fought like hell. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Yearwood.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you for the inspiration and thank you for the education.